The clinking of crystal glasses, soft murmurs of old money, and the distant echo of a live-string quartet filled the grand Tuscan-inspired vineyard estate as golden evening light spilled over silk tablecloths and champagne flutes. It was the kind of wedding you'd see in glossy lifestyle magazines, the kind where everything, down to the imported rose petals scattered along the aisle, screamed perfection. And Liam Montgomery hated every second of it. He stood near the bar, tuxedo immaculate, Rolex glinting under the fairy lights, and expression unreadable. Billionaire, tech mogul, eligible bachelor. People whispered about him as he passed. The Montgomery heir, still single. Didn't he date that model? But Liam wasn't listening. He never really did anymore. He was here because Ryan, his best friend since prep school, had begged him to attend his sister's wedding. Just show up, drink something expensive, and try not to scowl at the bridesmaids. Liam smirked at the memory. Scowling had become second nature lately. Life had grown sterile. Deals, deadlines, applause, loneliness. He swirled the bourbon in his glass, eyes scanning the crowd of polished guests, all part of a world that praised success but never noticed sadness in its midst. Then he saw her. She wasn't wearing designer labels or vying for attention. She stood off to the side, laughing quietly with an older woman near the hydrangeas. Her skin glowed in the evening light, a deep, warm mahogany tone, and her dress, cobalt blue and flowing, clung to her like it had been made for her and no one else. Her natural curls were pinned loosely, one curl slipping playfully along her cheekbone. Liam couldn't look away. Who was she? She didn't belong to this world. And yet she did. The way she held herself, the way she smiled like she wasn't performing for anyone. It shook something loose inside him, something he'd kept tightly locked behind 10-figure deals and penthouse windows. As if sensing his stare, she turned. Their eyes met. In that brief moment, so fleeting yet electrifying, he forgot about the vineyard, the music, the fake laughter around him. He saw her, and in her eyes, he saw himself, not the billionaire, not the brand, but the man he'd once been, the man he thought he lost. He didn't know her name, he didn't know her story, but in that second, he knew one thing with startling clarity. She was about to change everything. Liam Kingston's name was practically synonymous with power. 32, magnetic, and founder of one of the fastest-growing tech conglomerates on the East Coast. He was the kind of man the world noticed, even when he tried not to be noticed. But today, he was doing something he rarely did, attending a wedding. Not just any wedding, but his best friend Ryan Colton's little sister's wedding. He'd received the invitation 2 months ago. White, gold embossed, and traditional. It wasn't the kind of event Liam usually showed up for, but Ryan had been like a brother to him since college, and he knew how much this day meant. Liam stepped out of the Blacktown car in a sleek black tuxedo, shades shielding his sharp blue eyes from the Georgia sun. The countryside estate where the wedding was taking place looked straight out of a Southern romance novel. Cherry blossoms in bloom, fairy lights strung across white tents, and the soft buzz of anticipation hanging in the air. He scanned the crowd as he walked through the archway leading to the ceremony lawn. Everyone looked familiar, socialites, business partners, family members, until he spotted her. She stood near the rows of white chairs, in a simple but striking emerald green dress that hugged her curves. Her rich brown skin glowed in the sunlight, her curls pinned to one side with a jeweled clip. She laughed at something an older woman said, the kind of genuine laugh that made Liam's stomach flip unexpectedly. She didn't belong to this world of champagne flutes and practiced smiles. That much was clear. She was something different, raw, magnetic, grounded. Ryan walked up, patting Liam's back. "Glad you made it, man." Liam returned the smile. "Wouldn't miss it." "And who's that?" Ryan followed his gaze and grinned. "Ah, that's Amara. She's my cousin-in-law's best friend. An interior designer from Chicago helped decorate half the venue." "Why? Interested?" Liam didn't respond. Not with words. just a lingering look that said plenty. The ceremony began. Liam was ushered to his seat near the front, and to his quiet satisfaction, Amara was seated just 2 rows ahead. He found himself watching her reactions more than the couple exchanging vows. Her eyes welled with emotion during the bride's speech. She dabbed her eyes with a white lace handkerchief and smiled through her tears. She was beautiful, but more than that, real. In a sea of carefully curated appearances, Amara was entirely herself. When the ceremony ended and the crowd migrated toward the garden for the reception, fate, or perhaps Ryan's subtle matchmaking, placed Liam right across from Amara at the dinner table. He cleared his throat. "Hi. Liam Kingston." She looked up, mildly surprised. "Amara Joseph. I hear you're responsible for making this place look like a dream," he said, offering a smile. Amara chuckled, swirling the drink in her glass. "If you're talking about the floral arrangements, that was Elise. I just made sure the tent didn't collapse. Still impressive." There was a pause, a soft, electric kind. She looked at him with curious eyes. "I've seen you in magazines. You run, what is it? Nexus Tech." "Guilty," he said, leaning in slightly. "But I promise I'm much less intimidating in person." "Debatable," she replied, arching a brow playfully. "You've got that billionaire aura. Very James Bond." Liam laughed. It was genuine, almost startled out of him. "Do I at least get points for not talking about money or mergers in the first 5 minutes?" "Major points," she said. "Although now I'm wondering how long before you do." They spent the dinner chatting about everything except what people usually talked about with Liam. Not wealth, not strategy, not ambition. Instead, they traded childhood stories, music favorites, embarrassing wedding moments. By the time dessert arrived, Amara leaned in slightly. "You know, I expected to be bored at this wedding. Now I'm kind of glad I came." "Same here," Liam said, voice softer. "Very glad." Later, under the string lights on the dance floor, a slow R&B song began to play. Liam hesitated for a beat, then offered his hand. "Dance with me?" Amara tilted her head. "You dance?" "Not well," he admitted. "But for you, I'll risk humiliation." She placed her hand in his. "That's the most honest line I've heard all night." They moved to the music, slow and close. The world around them faded, the other couples, the noise, the glances. Amara's head rested lightly against Liam's chest. He wasn't sure what was happening, only that it felt unlike anything else. "You surprise me," she murmured. "How so?" "I thought you'd be colder, like your reputation." He smiled. "Sometimes reputations lie." She looked up at him. "And sometimes people do." Their eyes locked. The air tightened between them. It was just a dance. But it was also a door creaking open, one neither of them expected nor could deny. As the song ended, Liam leaned down just slightly. "I hope this isn't our last conversation." Amara smiled. "Depends. Are you always this charming or is it just weddings?" He chuckled. "Let's find out." They parted only when the party wound down, but their eyes kept finding each other across the venue, like a silent promise. Back in his hotel room that night, Liam stood by the window, still in his tuxedo, looking out at the stars. Something had shifted. He wasn't sure where it would lead. But he knew one thing. Amara Joseph had just walked into his carefully calculated world, and nothing would ever be the same. The day after the wedding, the estate grounds were quieter, emptied of most guests except a few close family members and friends staying for the Sunday brunch. Liam, who rarely lingered after social events, found himself making excuses to stay. Technically, his jet was fueled and ready, but something tethered him here. More precisely, someone. He walked the gravel path from the guest house toward the lake, following the directions Ryan had casually given him at breakfast. Amara said she wanted to check out the lake view this morning. Said she needed a breather from all the small talk. That was all Liam needed to hear. Sure enough, Amara was sitting on the edge of the wooden dock, legs dangling above the water, her sandals placed neatly beside her. She wore a breezy white sundress and a denim jacket, curls wild today, haloed by sunlight. She didn't turn around when she heard him approach. She just said he didn't strike her as the kind of guy who skips board meetings for lakeside mornings. He stopped behind her, grinning, saying she didn't strike him as someone who lets people sneak up on her. She looked over her shoulder and smiled. He sat beside her without asking and said he thought she might need company. She teased back, asking what made him think she wasn't trying to get away from people like him. He replied that she didn't walk away from him last night. She was quiet for a moment, then said softly that last night felt different. Liam nodded. It did. They sat, in companionable silence, watching the ripples on the water. Birds chirped somewhere in the trees. It was a kind of peace Liam hadn't felt in years. No boardrooms. No suits. No masks. Amara suddenly said she usually avoided weddings, but Elise insisted, and since she was marrying her cousin, she couldn't say no. Liam murmured that it must be fate then. She chuckled and asked if he believed in that kind of thing. He replied that he didn't, until about 20 hours ago. She glanced at him, more serious now, and told him that this couldn't be a thing. Liam turned to face her and asked why not. She said their worlds weren't even on the same planet. He had a tech empire. She had houseplants she forgot to water. He traveled by private jet. She took the red line. He smiled faintly, reminding her she was also honest, smart, talented, and had an eye for aesthetics most people would kill for. She blushed, caught off guard. He said he wasn't asking for a future or promises, just coffee. She bit her lip, staring at the lake, and asked if he really did coffee dates. Not until now, he answered. She laughed, calling him ridiculous. He agreed, possibly, but persistent. She hesitated, then said she was leaving tomorrow. Then tonight, he said. Dinner. Somewhere off the property. Just the two of them. No wedding crowd. No distractions. She studied him for a long time, then finally nodded. One dinner. But if he showed up in a tux, she was walking out. No tux, he promised. Scout's honor. That evening, Liam showed up in a navy button-down and jeans, looking more like a man on vacation than a billionaire. Amara greeted him at the front porch of the guest house in a black wrap dress and sandals, hair braided loosely. They drove to a small bistro 20 minutes out of town. Quiet, warm lighting and rustic charm. The kind of place where the waitress calls you hon and brings cornbread without asking. Amara said she liked it and had expected him to pick some Michelin-starred place with a view of the skyline. Liam grinned and said he Googled best sweet tea in Georgia. This place came up. Amara shook her head, laughing. He was too much. Over ribs and baked macaroni, they talked about their worlds. Amara told him about growing up in a tight-knit black neighborhood in Southside Chicago, raised by a single mom who taught her the value of grit and grace. She spoke of her struggles starting her own design firm, of clients who underestimated her, of late nights and missed birthdays. Liam shared his rise from foster care to Ivy League to tech prodigy. He spoke not just of his success but of the cost, loneliness, pressure, betrayal. The media had painted him as a genius, cold and unstoppable. But here, with Amara, he was just Liam. They didn't talk about race directly, but it hung in the spaces between words. Liam understood it wasn't his place to define her experience. Amara didn't need to test him. She just watched how he listened. And he did listen. Not to respond, but to understand. When dessert came, Amara dabbed her mouth with a napkin and said she never thought she'd spend a night like this. With him. Me neither, he said, but I'm glad we did. She met his gaze and asked what now. He leaned back, thoughtful. She would go back to Chicago. He would go back to New York. They'd keep talking, texting. Maybe a visit. And if it fizzled, it fizzled. But if it didn't, she pressed. If it didn't? He reached across the table, lightly brushing her fingers, and said then maybe fate knew what it was doing. They lingered in the parking lot afterward, reluctant to part. The stars glittered above them, the night warm and alive. "I should go," she said softly. "I know," he replied. Neither moved. Then, with a quiet breath, she stepped into his arms. Not passionately, not desperately, just there, present, real. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" he asked. "For seeing me." Liam's voice caught. "You're kind of impossible not to see." As he watched her drive away, something inside him stirred again. Something that whispered this wasn't a fling. It was the start of something he hadn't believed in for a long time. Something that looked a lot like love. 3 weeks had passed since that night at the bistro. Amara had returned to Chicago and dived back into work, juggling design consultations and supplier meetings while sipping coffee from the same cracked mug she'd used for years. But now, every morning started with a good morning text from Liam. Liam would ask how his favorite color magician was doing, and Amara would reply that she was tired, always wondering why he kept calling her that. His response was always the same, because she brought color to his grayscale world. She'd roll her eyes every time, but her smile would linger longer than she cared to admit. Liam, on the other hand, surprised even his assistant by pushing back meetings, rescheduling conferences, and using phrases like video call priority in his calendar, something he had never done before. His staff whispered that the aloof billionaire must be in love, but Liam didn't care what they thought. Every night they FaceTimed, sometimes for hours, sometimes just to sit in silence while she worked on a sketch and he reviewed reports. They didn't always need words, but beneath their conversations a truth lingered. This wasn't sustainable. One evening, while Liam watched her adjust lighting in her home office for a new interior project, he told her to come to New York. Amara raised an eyebrow, wondering if he was inviting her to visit, but he said he was inviting her to stay. She laughed nervously and asked if he was serious. He told her he had never been more serious about anything. She reminded him they had only seen each other in person twice, but he leaned closer to the screen and said he had spent hours with people in boardrooms and still didn't know their soul like he knew hers. And he knew his own better now, too. He wanted to see where this could go. For real. Amara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stared at the screen, her heart pounding. She finally said she had built everything on her own, her life, her business, and didn't want to be a shadow in someone else's empire. Liam replied that he wasn't trying to change her life. He asked if they could build something together. That night, she barely slept. The next morning, as sunlight streamed through her apartment window, Amara packed a weekender bag, not for a permanent move, but for a visit. Just a visit. New York City was its usual chaos. Taxi horns, chatter, and skyscrapers clawing at the clouds. Liam's driver met her at the airport, and within an hour, she was stepping into a penthouse suite overlooking Central Park. It was elegant, minimalistic, and filled with steel and glass. And yet, sitting on the granite kitchen island was a tiny potted succulent with a note saying her plants might want company. She smiled despite herself, calling it cute. Liam came in through the terrace door, shirt sleeves rolled, barefoot, holding 2 lattes. He seemed surprised she was really there. She confirmed she was, and he handed her a cup. Almond milk, no sugar, touch of cinnamon. She looked at him and realized he had remembered. He told her he memorized. They spent the day walking through Soho, browsing small boutiques and talking. Liam showed her the art gallery he secretly owned, and the bookstore where he used to write code on napkins as a teenager while dreaming of a better life. Amara showed him photos of her design portfolio and pointed out color palettes in nature that others wouldn't notice. That night they sat in front of his fireplace, a record playing soft jazz in the background. Liam watched her trace the rim of her wine glass and asked what she was thinking. She admitted she was terrified. He nodded slowly and told her he was too. She looked up, surprised, and he said he had never done anything like this before. He didn't let people in, not like this. But with her, he felt like he could breathe. Silence hung between them before she whispered that she wanted to try, but needed to go slow, and needed to keep being herself. Liam agreed, saying they'd go slow and she would stay herself. She leaned her head on his shoulder and asked what if it didn't work. He said then they tried something brave, and that he'd rather try with her than regret not trying at all. The days turned into a week. Amara extended her stay twice. Liam rearranged meetings to be near her, started cooking breakfast, badly, but she appreciated the effort, and introduced her to his closest friend, Ryan, who raised a surprised eyebrow and whispered that Liam really liked her. Liam admitted she was different. Ryan nodded, saying Liam was different too, softer, happier. But not everyone welcomed the change. At a black tie event Liam hosted for investors, some older board members made veiled, patronizing comments. They called Amara lovely and referred to her career in interior design as delightful. Amara held her head high and smiled politely, but Liam saw the tension in her shoulders. Later in the car, she told him they thought she was temporary, a novelty. Liam growled that they were irrelevant. She pointed out that they mattered to his business. He told her they didn't matter more than she did. When she asked if he really meant that, he turned to face her and said if being with her cost him the approval of a few crusty billionaires, he'd consider it a bargain. That night, as the city lights flickered outside the bedroom window, Amara lay beside him, watching him sleep. Vulnerable, human, real. She thought about the girl she was years ago, scrubbing walls in a tiny apartment, praying for one good break, believing love would always be a footnote in someone else's story. And now here she was. Not because she changed who she was, but because someone finally saw her as she was, and stayed. She whispered into the darkness, asking it not to be a dream, and Liam, eyes still closed, murmured, "Then don't wake up." The spring sun broke over Manhattan with a warm golden hue, spilling through the tall windows of Liam's penthouse. Amara stood barefoot on the terrace, her silk robe fluttering in the breeze as she sipped from a coffee mug. She stared out at Central Park but didn't see the trees or the joggers or the taxis honking far below. She was thinking. It had been 2 months since her first visit to New York. Since then, she'd been flying back and forth between Chicago and New York. Her interior design firm was thriving, largely due to the influx of new clients who, coincidentally, learned of her after seeing her photographed beside Liam Montgomery at a charity gala. Not that she took his help for granted, in fact, they argued about it. He had asked why she didn't want him to promote her business. She'd told him she needed to make it on her own, not because she was dating him. He respected that. Publicly, he never mentioned her work, but in private, he kept her business card tucked inside his wallet. She smiled to herself. Liam stepped onto the terrace, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. He teased her about being quiet in the morning, calling it dangerous. She laughed softly and leaned her head back against his chest, admitting it was getting harder to leave each time. He told her not to. She turned to face him. He said he wasn't asking her to give up her life but to bring it here, and they would figure it out together. Amara studied his face. The billionaire who once guarded his heart behind gold-plated walls was now laying it bare. She placed a hand on his cheek. She admitted she was scared. He covered her hand with his and said he was too. The next evening, Liam invited her to his company's anniversary gala, an opulent affair in a glass ballroom overlooking the East River. Celebrities, business moguls, and media personnel would be in attendance. Amara hesitated, saying she didn't belong in those circles. Liam told her he didn't either. He just built them. She smirked at his smooth answer. He told her that when she walked into that room with him, she wasn't just the black woman he was dating. She was the woman he was proud to be with, the one who reminded him to breathe, the one who helped him find his heart again. Her eyes stung with emotion. She agreed to go, but only if he wore the lavender tie. He asked if it was the one she hated. She corrected him. It was the one she picked. He was confusing the two. The gala was everything she expected. Extravagant, loud, and filled with people who looked at her like she didn't quite belong. Yet when Liam placed his hand on the small of her back and introduced her as the woman who was changing his life, every doubtful glance melted under the glow of his affection. A reporter approached them and asked about the woman who had stolen Liam's heart. Liam smiled at Amara and replied that he hadn't known how empty his success was until she walked into his world. She didn't steal his heart. He gave it to her freely. The reporter asked Amara what she did. Amara responded that she built spaces that felt like home and somehow found hers in a man who once thought he didn't need one. Liam squeezed her hand. After the gala, they escaped to a rooftop garden lit by string lights and wrapped in silence. Amara admitted the night was overwhelming and kicked off her heels. Liam handed her a glass of champagne, complimenting her on handling everything like a queen. She laughed and said she handled it like someone who kept reminding herself not to trip on marble. They sat together. Liam asked if she remembered the night of the wedding when she told him he was staring too hard. She said she did. He said he hadn't stopped staring since. He looked at her and told her he wanted this. Her, him, the chaos, the coffee, the late-night talks, even the fights over throw pillows. Tears stung her eyes again, but she smiled and whispered that she wanted it too. 3 weeks later, Amara moved to New York, not into Liam's penthouse, but into a cozy brownstone he purchased under her name. It had exposed brick, high ceilings, and a garden out back where she planted tulips and rosemary. He helped her paint the guest room. It was a disaster. She laughed at his terrible edging. They hosted dinners for friends. Amara's childhood best friend flew in and fell in love with Ryan, Liam's best friend. Liam's board raised concerns about his public image, fearing his romantic entanglement would become a distraction. He told them in a meeting that if being in love was considered a liability, then he was proud to be one. 6 months after the wedding where they met, Liam took Amara back to that same vineyard. They walked the grounds hand in hand, reminiscing. He said that was where he first saw her. She wore blue and looked like peace. She smiled and said he looked like trouble. He laughed and admitted he'd been trouble ever since. They sat under a tree overlooking the lake. Liam told her he had planned to propose somewhere grand, in front of cameras, in a ballroom, or on top of the Empire State Building. But what he really wanted was to ask her where it all started. He pulled out a small velvet box and opened it to reveal a simple, elegant ring. He asked Amara Johnson to marry him. She stared at him, tears spilling over, and asked if he was serious. He nodded, saying he was more serious than he'd ever been about anything. She smiled through her tears and said yes. He slipped the ring on her finger. She reminded him that he still couldn't scramble eggs properly. He reminded her that she talked to her plants. They both laughed and sealed the moment with a kiss. They married a year later. It was a small ceremony with just close friends and family. Amara wore a gown she designed herself, ivory with lavender accents. Liam wore the lavender tie, of course. No press, no headlines, just love. At the reception, he whispered in her ear that he was still staring. She smiled and said she was still home. And in the crowd, as they danced beneath fairy lights and stars, no one saw race, status, or wealth. They just saw love. Real, powerful, unexpected love. A gentle breeze rolled through the sun-dappled garden behind their brownstone, carrying the scent of blooming lavender and fresh earth. Amara knelt in the garden, her hands covered in soil, a wide-brimmed straw hat shielding her from the warm New York sun. She hummed softly to herself as she tucked new seedlings into the soil, her happy place. Inside, Liam stood at the kitchen island, struggling to flip pancakes without burning them. He glanced toward the open patio doors where Amara knelt and smiled at the woman who turned his world right side up. His world had once been marble floors and high-rises. Now it was coffee at 7 a.m., mismatched socks, and Saturday gardening with the love of his life. He wouldn't trade it for anything. When she came inside, brushing dirt from her knees, Liam met her with a kiss on the forehead and a sheepish grin. He may or may not have created charcoal discs instead of pancakes. Amara laughed and peeked over his shoulder. Babe, those were weapons, not breakfast. He had been trying to impress her. She wrapped her arms around his waist and reminded him that he impressed her every day. They had been married for nearly a year. The ceremony had been intimate. No press, no headlines, just the people who mattered. Ryan had cried. Her father had walked her down the aisle with pride in his eyes. Liam had whispered his love before the officiant even started speaking. Now, life was a quiet rhythm of shared mornings, work days, cuddled movie nights, and weekend escapes to vineyards where it all began. Amara's business flourished, and Liam continued leading Montgomery Global with one hand and holding her hand with the other. Their love had become the kind that didn't need declarations. It lived in glances, in jokes only they understood, in the way he rested his hand on her belly now, smiling. He asked if it still felt like home. She nodded and placed her hand over his, more than ever. They hadn't told anyone yet. The doctor had confirmed it just a week ago. A heartbeat tiny and fluttering like a secret waiting to bloom. She said they should tell Ryan. Liam chuckled, imagining him screaming and dropping the phone. She grinned and said they'd tell him tomorrow. Today was just theirs. Later that evening, as the sky blushed with sunset and fireflies lit up the garden, they sat side by side, fingers interlaced, dreaming aloud about names, lullabies, and bedtime stories. Liam kissed her knuckles and whispered that she had changed everything. Amara leaned on his shoulder and said he let her. And under the golden sky, two souls who met at a wedding neither planned for, in a life neither expected, sat quietly in the garden they built together, proof that sometimes the most unexpected moments lead to the most beautiful beginnings. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please encourage us by subscribing, like, comment, and share. Bye. See you in our next video.